Guys, this is going to be my review for Kengan Omega chapter 183. I hope you guys are doing good. Now, I know I say this a lot, but if you're not up to date with the latest chapter, I'm not sure why you're here yet. Catch up and come back because there's a lot to go through with this chapter. Especially this week because I feel like there was a lot more questions that need to be answered than answers that we had questions for. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing because I love theorizing, so let's get into it. So in this chapter, we start off in the inside and we have Yan, the head of the worm, waiting for Tiger Nico, Gilbert Wu, who's brought Willem with him, and also another person called Lu Chan. I don't think that we've met him before, I could be wrong, but he also seems to be one of the people that's on the same kind of level as all the other guys, like an executive that works under the connector. I'm kind of hoping that we start to get more of an understanding of how the dynamic of this whole organization works. Like, to be honest, we don't even really understand how the worm works, and now we know that the worm's part of this bigger organization that works under the connector. We don't know who the connector is, really, and what he's about, and it does seem to be the case that there's a lot of moving parts. Obviously, we've got the Westward faction, the worm, we've got Tiger Nico and whatever he's doing, then we've got this new person, Lu Chan. He could just be someone that's under the worm, but we don't know yet. And it makes you wonder what's their overall plan. I also thought it was kind of interesting seeing the dynamics between the characters as well, like Tiger Nico and Gilbert, because Tiger Nico seems to have, or did have, a really good relationship with Edward. We know that Gilbert is Edward's clone. He's got all of his memories, so he's basically the same person, but I do feel like there's slight differences, which I'll get into later on. And then obviously Tiger Nico and the head of the worm seem to be very familiar with each other as well. Makes sense if they're all on the same kind of level working under, well, I believe Tiger Nico works under the head of the worm, and then the Westward faction is just completely separate. So we'll see how that goes. I thought having Willem there was quite interesting, especially because Gilbert said that he wants to introduce him to the connector for whatever reason. And it does also seem like Gilbert's plans may be slightly different, or the way he goes about his plans anyway, may be slightly different to the way the original Edward went about them. For example, it's noted that he doesn't have spares. When Tiger Nico asks who Willem was, he assumes that he was just one of his other resurrection spares, to which Gilbert says, no, obviously he's my right-hand man. And I noticed that there was kind of a pause from Willem, so it seems like there's probably a lot more to the story than that we don't know yet. But I'm wondering if the reason that it seems like anyway Gilbert doesn't have any spares with him is because he's kind of learned his lesson, or maybe he just feels like he doesn't need them because he's so much stronger than the original anyway. This is something that's also brought to our attention from Willem when he also talks about Gilbert, saying that he's pretty much the greatest thing to come out of the Westward faction. Edward Wu was already like their greatest and strongest fighter, and then Willem's a clone of him that's been updated and his genetics have been modified, which isn't necessarily something that's new to us, because we kind of had a feeling that that was the kind of same situation that we had with Migoro Masaki and Hayami Masaki. Hayami Masaki being slightly altered to be able to integrate better with society. He's probably a little bit smarter than Migoro, and possibly his genetics have been updated in his physical stats as well. However, that confirmation that this has been done with Gilbert as well gives us more insight into what the worm's capable of in terms of cloning, in terms of genetic modification. And it also gave me a question of whether that same kind of thing has been done with other people that we know are clones, like Ryuki and Oma. And it would make more sense to why there's different clones of the same person if that was the case, because I guess it could be a thing where Oma and Ryuki were just made for organ stock. But if this is the case, it also brings into question why they weren't in a facility like Kiryu was with his father, and why they were just let loose on the inside doing whatever and going through all these different kinds of training. But if it's a case where they're being built up for something and their genetics have been modified in different ways, say Ryuki's been modified more for speed, Oma's been modified more for strength, just an example, I'm not saying that is the case, but putting them in an environment like the inside to see how they thrive could be a part of their experiment to see which one is worthy, and could tie into the Tiger's vessel, the connector, all those different plot threads that are coming through, and kind of this like heir to the throne kind of thing that they're kind of teasing in the story. But what I also like in this chapter, that a point was made by Willem that Gilbert's this super strong, extraordinary person in the Westward faction. There's been no one better than him in their clan. So why is he, who's so much more powerful than even Edward Wu, so readily available to bend the knee to the connector? Like, what kind of monster is this connector that Gilbert Wu's like, yep, I'll resign with your plans? And you know what? That is a very good question. Of course, we've seen hints of him in the past with flashbacks of Katara Retsudo and Kure Erio, and what kind of implications and fear they felt from him and how powerful he was there. Which I also find funny because we've got this image of this connector, this super insidious guy in the shadows that we don't really know much about. And then we've got the actual connector chilling with Joji, drinking beer, so joyful. And like, it doesn't seem to be aligning at the moment. Like, obviously there must be more to this guy for him to have like all of these executives under him that are very powerful in their own right and are pretty much kind of evil or villainous in their own right also. He has to be able to hold his own to that regard, but there's so much that we don't know about him. I do have to admit though, a part of me does kind of wonder if Gilbert Wu plans to kind of take over or overthrow the connector, and maybe that's why he wants to introduce Willem to the connector so he has a better idea of what they're up against. Kind of a thing where you bring your people up the ranks, and then when you're ready to decimate, you're more prepared and you can just take over from there because everyone that's higher ranking is with you already. I'm not sure how well that will go for him because the connector seems like he's going to be a beast. And I don't know, we even have later on in the chapter that his presence seems to be powerful enough that Oma recognizes that he's seen him before. Of course, we saw Oma walk past him in the previous chapter and he almost stopped because he was like, what is this I'm sensing kind of thing. I know a lot of people believe that Oma and the connector could be related in some way. I know some people have said clones, some people have just said relatives. I'm not sure about the clone thing yet, just because I'm not entirely sure it makes sense in terms of stats. I could be wrong, but obviously we know that there's genetic modification as well, so that could also affect the stats as well. Speaking of connectors and clones, we're brought back to Ryuki and Koga, kind of arguing with each other about the previous fight. And we kind of get an implication of what a lot of us already suspected, and it was kind of stated in the story as well, is that Adam could have probably won that fight at any time that he wanted to. And Ryuki's win, while very good, wasn't a fundamental win or wasn't a proper win in everyone's eyes, and I can understand why, to an extent anyway. Koga tells Ryuki that Adam was fighting within the confines of the tournament, whereas Ryuki was going for the kill, and that was the difference between their fights. And Ryuki, he does kind of have a point. Ryuki's like, I told him I was aiming to kill, that was the way I was fighting. If he didn't want to bring it to that level, that's on him. Which to an extent is real, but I do feel like Ryuki is going down a hole that's been dug out by Kiryu, and something needs to be done, otherwise he's going to drop all the way down to the bottom. Which is why in the last chapter I did say that I feel like their upcoming fight, Koga and Ryuki, is going to be very much a battle of ideologies. Kind of reminiscent to Oma versus Kiryu in Kengan Ashura, where while they were fighting to get the physical superiority over each other, they were also battling against ideals. And Oma was hoping that he could try and rehabilitate Kiryu in some way by doing the chi blocker technique to stop like the damage that was going to his brain. So I do feel like this is going to be the same kind of thing, but we're actually going to get a better positive result compared to Kiryu and Oma. And I did like the reactions and statements from some of the other characters as well. Like Yamashita was panicking and kind of blaming himself for the situation and kind of thinking like, hindsight's 2020, I should have been able to foresee this. And then Oma kind of seems like, I have to say, Oma's a lot wiser than probably the way that he was at the beginning of Ashura. Definitely his mindset's completely different, and it's interesting to see him kind of giving Yamashita advice and saying like, there's nothing that we can really do, we're not going to be able to get through to him that way, it needs to be Koga in their fight. However, the main thing is coming, the matchups. Semi-final number 1, we've got Sorpang versus Rahito. I'm so excited for that fight. What I will say though is that I do kind of feel like this is going to go to Rahito, mainly because I feel like Sorpang is going to be very much damaged from his previous fight. Like, the guy did a headbutt right into the ground with Cosmo on his back. Like, no matter how hard his skull is, we know that his brain is pretty much normal. The same way that Mikazuki Rei was able to beat him by keeping his brain spinning and doing a madness, the same thing could happen, or the same effects could happen from headbutting the ground. So in a way, I am quite worried about him, especially because Rahito is a strong opponent as well. They're pretty much evenly matched, I'd say, in strength. Maybe the edge would go to Rahito. In skill, it's a different story, obviously, but we know that Rahito has been improving, training under Beard, so you never know what's going to happen. But I do feel like Rahito is going to take this one, just because I feel like he's a lot fresher from his fight anyway, compared to Sorpang. And I'd also say the same with Koga and Ryuki. I feel like Ryuki was a lot more beaten up, definitely a lot more beaten up by Adam compared to Koga in his fight with I can't remember the guy's name. I think it was Silver. I'm very sorry, I can't remember. But yeah, he was fighting the BJJ fighter. I feel like his damage was a lot less. He still did get damaged, obviously. He was having trouble with Indestructible and that was messing up his hands and stuff like that. But he didn't get as beaten up by his opponent compared to Adam Dudley beating the hell out of Ryuki. And I feel like that's gonna come into play as well. Will it be a fair matchup? I don't know. But this is how I see it going. I'd say that what's gonna happen is Rihito is gonna beat Sorpang, Koga is gonna beat Ryuki, and then I feel like Rihito may beat Koga. Just because I feel like the fight between Koga and Ryuki is gonna be very much even and he's gonna be beaten up as well. And then we're gonna get the Rihito dub finally. If this doesn't happen, I'm telling you, Sanjovic hates Rihito. I've said it. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it there. Let me know what your thoughts are on the chapter. Thank you for watching as always, and until next time, I'm out.